Excellent.
Who
Hey,
knows?
Michael, Martin here. I'm just going to take a few minutes and introduce you. I just want
Okay.
everybody uh, to say hi to Dr. Michael Beug, who's been a long, long time friend of the Alberta Mycological Society. And first time I met Michael was in 2005 at the NAMA trustees meeting in Wisconsin. And he immediately took me under his wing, introduced me to everybody, and worked hard at getting our 2006 NAMA foray in Hinton happening and going. And at that foray, he was certainly one of the guest identifiers, and also he did a presentation for us on uh, on poison mushrooms.
Philosophies.
Yeah, no, actually, poison mushrooms, Mike. You gave
Well,
us a poison
I
mushroom.
did 3 presentations.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I can only remember the one. Mind you, I was busy running around organizing everything. Um, Also, I think in 2012, you also gave us a talk, came to Edmonton for our AGM and gave us a talk. One of the things after I got to meet Michael, he introduced me to the Pacific Northwest Key Council, and which is a really interesting group of people who are kind of, well, professional, semi-professional, and super keen amateurs who work on writing keys for identifying mushrooms. And so this is a really strong background that Mike has, and has worked with all kinds of people, teaching them how to write a key and how to use a key and whatnot. And the reason I'm bringing this up, I just wanted to bring your attention to Mike's new book called Mushrooms of Cascadia, and it's based on a key principle and based on a pictorial key. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the real reason I did it is because I was seeing how people use their mushroom books over the last 50 years or so, and they primarily thumb through the book until they find a picture match. And I noticed though that often they weren't looking at the right features, the critical features that would tell one species from another. And so I wanted to write a key that would lead people at least to the correct genus quite reliably, and then to the right subgenus and the right species or group of species. And by doing the book in a key fashion, where all I tell people are the important features of each mushroom in the book itself, because the book is tied to a Key Council program called MycoMatch, where you can get full detailed descriptions and see all kinds of additional pictures. But I wanted people to know the critical features so that they would get very close to the right mushroom right away. And also by doing it that way, I can include just slightly under 1,100 photographs, and counting lookalikes, you can identify 1,500 species. And when I say mushrooms of Cascadia, I mean the whole drainage of the Columbia River, and that would include its tributaries like the Snake River. And the Columbia itself actually starts in Alberta, and the Snake, is in Montana, and some of its tributaries are also in Alberta. And so the species in this book actually do a rather extensive job of covering the mushrooms that you're going to find anywhere hunting in your region. And I would say probably around 800 of the species that you have are in the book. And that's way more than most mushroom books have total. But the important thing is you learn how the genera are organized. I start with a 3-page compact key where you just you look at some pictures and say, well, these are gilled mushrooms, so that takes you one part of the book. And that I get rid of the gilled mushrooms right away. And then I talk about, then the jelly fungus, and then the polypores all together, and then the chanterelles. But the very first thing once you get through that part of the key, you start with the chanterelles and then the boletes and then the morels. So you learn the easier things to learn first before you get into the rather tricky business of trying to identify the guild fungi. So that's how I structured the book, and I'm really excited. Now, that's not the only resource I use, but that plus MycoMatch it makes an extremely powerful tool, and MycoMatch covers 6,000 species. And for example, even here with my book, half of the mushroom I have found this month have been species I've never seen before and that aren't in the book. But I post that information of my new species in iNaturalist, and then I have an alphabetized list of all my iNaturalist posts in my website, which is mushroomsofcascadia.com. And I also, in mushroomsofcascadia.com, have podcasts, I have other stories, I have some programs, and I also have all my medicinal and culinary mushroom information in a couple of papers that you can access. So I try to tie this book to a very powerful supplemental tool, which we literally update every month. So that's a long answer.
And that's a very good answer, and it's a good book. You know, I mean, we have our favorite here in Alberta, which is Mushrooms of Western Canada by Lenny Shalkwick, and as far as I'm concerned, this should be number 2 on all of our Albertans' lists for picking up a book. Also, actually, Michael and I have been been working at different things together. We started the NAMA Medicinal Mushroom Committee, and Michael's a member of that now and working away at medicinal mushrooms. So does a great job with that. And tonight's topic is going to be Ascomycetes of north of Morels and other Ascomycetes. Here's Michael's book, Ascomycetes of North America, and it's a big, thick thing, and it's my go-to reference for all cup fungi and whatnot. And this is quite the tome. The tome on Ascos is from Michael here, and I'll turn it over to you to start with your presentation.
Okay, by the way, that book now is about $1,000 a copy, so take care of it.
Oh, excellent, thank you.
Okay, here we go. So this will cover a wide range of ascos, but I'm really going to focus on the edible ones and the few very serious poisonous ones, and then a few miscellaneous interesting things at the very end, closing with good edible choice truffles, which I realize you won't have in Alberta, but if you wander out to coastal British Columbia or down the coast, then you can enjoy some of those. So here we go. The first thing in the spring, of course, is the Beug bohemica, and it actually, when properly cooked, is as delicious and as edible as a black morel, very similar in flavor, but it's distinguished by a cap, a head that hangs from the top of the stem like a skirt, and is not attached to the stem at any point. And when you cut it in half from top to bottom, it's filled with a cottony material. Now, people have traditionally not eaten much of the stem, and the latest stuff I've discovered is that whole stem is edible and great. So when you find Beug bohemica, harvest all of it, cook all of it. I like to throw it in cold salted water and let it soak for a while, and get out all of the little critters that might be there and get it nice and clean. And then I chop it and put it in a pan. And I often add a little bit of extra water because this mushroom is in the Morchelaceae, and it has the same neurotoxins as morels, and they must be thoroughly cooked to be completely safe to eat. Partially cooked, you may not get sick, but what will happen is you will have bad reactions to alcohol, for example. But I've served these mushrooms with alcohol to over 1,000 people now, properly cooked, nobody gets sick. So I just put them in the pan and I dry saute. Just put about a layer and a half deep of the sliced mushrooms in, and be it morels or these verpas, and bring the thing to a boil at medium-high heat. As soon as it's boiled off, the water, turn the heat down to medium-low, and add some butter and olive oil and a little bit of salt, and then saute until they're lightly brown. And these are incredibly delicious. Now, I was quite confident a year ago that bright yellow-orange verpa must be a different species, but no, it has exactly the same genetics. And so this has a fairly wide range of colors. It can be darker than the ones in the left, and it can be more yellow than orange, the one on the right. Now, Verpa conica, the one in the middle, it actually is a lookalike to Verpa conica, and we had no idea whether it was edible or not. But one day at my brother's place, he had a 5-acre place with a lot of wild cherry trees, and I must have collected 500 of these under the cherry trees. And the important lesson here is, how do you know whether a mushroom is edible or not? Well, first of all, I want to make sure its brothers and sisters are all edible. And since I knew this was closely related to Verpa bohemica, I figured it was probably safe to try. At worst, it would just cause some mild stomach upset. The other thing, if just a few people eat it, and maybe one or two, and somebody gets sick, a mushroom like this might be ruled as toxic. And indeed, Verpa bohemica, for most of my life, was considered a poisonous mushroom. But now enough people have eaten it, properly cooked, and they don't get sick when they cook it properly, and we realize it's edible. So I took one of my early mushroom classes, and we cooked up all of the Verpa conicas we had, and I told people, well, we're going to find out whether this is edible or not, and nobody got at all sick. So we now know for sure that Verpa conica is absolutely edible. But the important lesson here is, how do you know whether something's edible or not? You have a lot of people eat it. If very few people have an adverse reaction, we call it edible. If a lot of people get in trouble, we call it poisonous. So now we get on to morels, which got me started in this whole business. And this is the Morchella, the landscape morel, Morchella importuna, and it is medium good edible, but it grows almost everywhere where people put down wood chips, and it's been moved literally all over the world. It's also quite common in areas that have recently been logged in clear cuts. It's not a burn morel per se, but it's a disturbance morel where there's a lot of wood chips in the ground. And it's rather distinctive compared to all of the other black morels. And this is a black morel. And black morels are the ones that in age, in all but one species, the ridges turn darker as it ages. Now in the blonde morels can start out quite black, but as they age, the ridges turn blonde and turn more pale. But this one will have ridges that get darker. So the big central picture, you see medium young ones, and on the side pictures, you see older specimens where the ridges have darkened nicely. And this now is the very most abundant black morel. It's literally spread worldwide. But when Micheal was doing his 10-year study of the morels of North America, that's both Canada and the US, nobody turned this mushroom in. and yet it is the very most common morel of them all. And for a long time, the current name, Morchella norvegiensis, had been lost. People really did not know what that was. And I found this the same week as my friend Andres Wojtek in Newfoundland found it. And we both found it under spruce in the summer. So we decided it was probably a spruce associate. And we named it Morchella eohespera. Eos for the goddess of the sunrise, and Hespera for the Hesperides, the sprites of the sunset. And when we did fairly careful research before we published it, unlike the person who published Morchella norvegiensis, who based it on one collection and didn't know his what from his down, we knew this mushroom was present in herbarium collections from the Alps, from the Scandinavian countries, from China, from the Soviet Union. So this is a widespread mushroom. And now, because of some of the research that have been done by my students, I can tell you reliably that this thing in the Northwest, at least, starts fruiting in late March at sea level, and it's done fruiting in mid-July at about 4,000 feet. But if you go more interior, like Montana, you'll find it up to 6, 8, 9, 10,000 feet in elevation. I'm certain that you have it up in Alberta, and I hate to have to call it Morchella norvegiensis because it really was all over the world. Norvegiensis itself was collected from one site and was sent to a pharmacist in France who slapped a name on it without doing DNA or any, well, it was pre-DNA days. But now here's a really delicious, very, very meaty morel that's virtually everywhere. When it's growing singly, it's hard to distinguish from another morel called Morchella schneideri. But Morchella schneideri is distinguished by growing in great clumps. And the color of Morchella schneideri is always very reliable. It's always going to be gray, green, burgundy, or black. And the regions are going to turn dark in age, but it grows in clumps. And the clumps can have as many as 18 mushrooms in a clump. The basket that I'm holding on the right-hand side of the screen is 1 hour's worth of picking from a 40-acre, 4-year-old clear cut. Now, everyone knows that a 4-year-old clear cut has nothing. Now, I found out about this clear cut because I saw a commercial picker friend of mine, his car parked by the clear cut. Now, I'm sure he was not picking there. He always hides his car somewhere. And so I called him up that night, and he and his partner had picked 800 pounds of morels that afternoon in that 4-year-old clear cut. And he told me to get up there right away. I called up 3 friends who had never gone morel hunting before. We filled 4 5-gallon buckets in an hour of morels. And we were able to keep picking morels there every 3 or 4 days for 2 weeks until the nearby town of Glenwood, where we were only 3 miles out of town, discovered what was going on. And that was sort of the end of that. But at that time, what I did not know about Morchella schneideri, in addition to the fact that it grows in these big, beautiful clumps, is it will grow in the same spot for 10 or 20 years. Where Morchella importuna, you've got to find a new spot every year. So this is a really choice mushroom and really meaty. Just cook it well, as we described. Now, this is a mushroom that Michael Kuo had named Morchella frustrata because it's the color of a blonde morel, of an esculenticlade, but it's the shape of a black morel. And the shape of a black morel means that the ridges run fairly straight from the bottom all the way up to the top. This mushroom will grow in small clumps, and it's also a mushroom that tends to grow in the same place year after year once you find a patch. And it's called the mountain blonde. And there's also no doubt in my mind that this is in Alberta. And it's one of the really delicious mushrooms. It often stains slightly red. And the lady holding that one mushroom is Maggie Rogers, another key council member. And that's a largely sized mushroom. The important part of the story here is that Steve Trudell, who's written Mushrooms of the Pacific Northwest, had never found this mushroom. And about 7 years ago, I had never found Morchella americana, the esculenticlade mushroom. And so we went out one day, and I went out to hunt and find americana, and he went out to hunt and find importuna. We get back at the end of the day. The only thing I found was a whole lot of importuna. The only thing Steve Trudell found was a whole lot of americana. So it was only 4 years ago that I found my first what we call a blonde morel, and we'll get to those shortly as soon as I finished all these black things. And then under hardwoods, and you'll have this up in Alberta for sure, is Morchella brunea. It tends to have a longer, fleshier stipe and not quite as meaty as Schneider eye and Tridentina, but it's still a very, very delicious mushroom. Now, the interesting thing about the side picture where people are taking photographs, there's about 5 cottonwood trees, and this is a pullout at a game refuge where everyone stops to admire Convoy Lake Refuge and the wildflowers and the birds. And under those 5 cottonwoods, in a place where people are stopping on and off all day long, I pulled in with my son and his wife and his in-laws who were from the Netherlands. And pretty soon they says, "Oh, isn't this a morel?" And that sack there we filled completely in this incredibly public spot. So the other thing to know about morels is they're bloody easy to walk through the woods and not see, because looking down on them, they very much resemble conifer cone. And in this case, these things were big. They were 4 inches, 5 inches tall, and I hadn't seen them. But when we started to look, within about 15 minutes, we'd filled our entire bag and had a very nice morel meal. So when you find your first morel, get down as low as you can and make a slow 360 all around. And hope as you turn around, you don't see too many morels you trampled as you walked into the first one you saw. And the other thing to know about is whenever you go in a trail, it makes morels magically grow. So you'll find twice as many when you walk back out as when you walked in. Now, there's also a half-free morel. It looks kind of like a cross between a verpa and a regular morel, but there's a big sinus, a big loop before the edge of the cap connects to the stem. But the cap does connect to the stem, and that's Morchella populophylla out west. And up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a very different looking mushroom, but when you cut it in half, you can see that it is another half-free morel. Now, the one in the upper right has the texture and look of a verpa conica. The stipe breaks easily, but there's no cotton in the hollow part. And when you do the DNA of the one in the upper right and the big image to the left is identical, absolutely identical. I was positive that the little prick, that's the one on the upper right, was a new species, but it's just Morchella populophylla, which tends to grow not right in stream bottoms. It tends to grow in slightly drier, higher elevations where the little prick grows right in stream bottoms, in the same kind of habitat where you would find Verpa bohemica. Now, on the East Coast, we would have Morchella populophylla. I don't think it comes out as far as Alberta, and I suspect what you have is Morchella populophylla in Alberta. And then there's the burn morels. And the ones that we have named are Morchella eximia, Morchella exuberans, Morchella sextillata, Morchella septimillata, and one more that's not yet named. And of those 5 morels, you need DNA to distinguish them. All of the mushrooms shown in this image were part of the published name Morchella eximia. They are all exactly the same morel. And so you can see the difference between when it first comes out, it can be pinkish or not, or more orangish, and the ridges aren't very dark. As it gets older, the pits change color and the ridges darken. And all of the burn morels are meaty and delicious, but there's one burn morel that's not in this picture because it's neither a black morel nor a blonde morel. It belongs to a completely different clade, and that's Morchella tomentosa, the gray morel. And the gray morel starts out, and you can see it in the upper right-hand close-up of a young cap. It's covered with all these little hairs. Now, the big mature ones shown on the left have the same number of hairs and the same size, but as the mushroom got bigger and swelled to larger size, the hairs just got more spread out and more dispersed. So it looks very different. And in age, it's colored very much like a blonde morel. But these things grow from a tuber in the ground. And I'm going to just sneak ahead for a minute. I might have to come back. Yeah, no, I don't have that image in this talk. I've got a picture taken from Alberta, up about even with your elevation, where some friends of mine from British Columbia had crossed a river to get into an old into a burn. And early in the season, they filled up on the spring on the regular burn morels, but they were able to keep picking morels in that burn for months because this mushroom will keep fruiting until the snow flies, as long as there's adequate moisture. And I sort of discovered that indirectly when Martin and I were both back in Asheville, North Carolina, and a Montana collector was there with fresh morels in late August, and I was trying to figure out how he had done it, and what he had brought were these black morels. And the other thing to know about them, of course, you never have forest fires up your way, except for half the province getting burned down. This will fruit sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 years after a burn. It will still keep producing. So it's a valuable thing to know about the gray morel. So now we move to the blonde morel, or the Esculenta clade. This is something that Michael Kuo wanted to call Esculentoides, and it's something that I won't name the name of this French pharmacist. He named it Morchella americana, but he named various colors and shapes of Morchella americana, about 20 different species, but they all turned out to be Americana because he wasn't doing DNA and he didn't know his up from his down, but everything that looked different to him got a different name. But as long as you name it first, if he actually hit something that was different DNA, that name stuck. But if it wasn't, the name just disappeared. So Morchella americana is the official name for our main Esculenta clade morel in all of North America. Now we have actually 2 other Esculenta clade morels, but first I want to focus on the difference. Now notice that the ridges and pits are much more randomly arranged than they are in the Elea clade or the black morels, but these things are equally delicious, cooked the same way, but they can be quite dark. And this is Morchella prava, and this mushroom is known from Colorado, it's known from Idaho, it's known from Oregon, and so I'm quite confident you have it up there. But the thing to know is that the image on the left, which was by Harold Larson, could easily have turned out to be Morchella americana. It can be that dark. So it's virtually impossible to tell a Prava from Americana. And I have found in Washington State, we found a collection that turned out to be Morchella vulgaris, a very common European mushroom. And it's pretty clear that that morel also occurs around the Great Lakes. So you could have as many as 3 species of these Americana type morels in Alberta. Now this is a really interesting morel, and Dysiotis venosa, and it's distinguished from similar cups by a chlorine bleach odor. And I thought 3 years ago that I was finding about 5 different species that were all Dysiotis, but everything turned out to just be venosa. So it's highly variable in the overall appearance, but the spores always look exactly like a typical morel spore, and they all smell like chlorine bleach. But you cook them up till they're nice and crispy, and at least the people in the Puget Sound Mycological Society know of this as camp bacon. They're quite delicious when well cooked. But if you see a mushroom that's a discoid mushroom like this, that doesn't have the chlorine bleach odor, it's probably edible, but I would recommend avoiding it and only eat the ones that smell like bleach. For example, Gyrometra melaleucoides, which has recently been named, well, this is actually an old name, Pseudodysina melaleucoides, was the name in about 2010. And then we put all these things together in one great genus, Gyrometra, and now they've taken it apart. But it has spores that are very, very different than a morel type spore in the lower image, and they're very small compared to other the disc-shaped mushrooms, and they have 1 or 2 oil drops in each. And so to identify these little ones, it's absolutely critical to have taken a spore print. And here is Dysina perlata group, and we have 2 species in the West, and I'm sure you have the same too in Alberta. You have Dysina ancilis that does not have a stipe, and Dysina McKnightii that has a very short stipe. Now, I learned everything as Dysina perlata, and perlata is the mushroom that is found in Europe and is not found yet, at least in North America. Then look at the spores here. They're really neat looking, very distinctive, but they have a sharp point at each end. So anything that has a sharp point at each end is going to be in the genus Dysina. And the spore, you have to actually take a spore print, and you want to do that and mount it only in water, never in KOH, and never use Meltzer's. If you're going to try and stain it, you want to use Lugol's solution, because the KOH in Meltzer's and in KOH will change the spore morphology and mess you up. Now, one of these mushrooms that are discoid actually has gyrometrin, and this is the only thing except mushrooms that are still in the genus Gyrometra that contain gyrometrin. And for that reason alone, I would not eat anything that is disc-shaped. And it gets the name Piscidyscinus because if you look at the spore, each end has a fishtail-shaped knob on the end. So it's a knob that's depressed in the middle. Now, Alden Dirks and I named Dysina persicula a year ago, and the name persicula in Latin literally means little peach. And this was a mushroom that was always much smaller than the other Dysina-like mushrooms, and was always sort of peach colored. And so in honor of my little peach common name, Alden chose Dicina versicula, but now we have to learn change to Piscidicina. And Pisci, that is to because of fish. And so it's telling you this is the fish-shaped spored Dicina, but don't eat it. It doesn't have a lot of gyrometrin, but gyrometrin breaks down to monomethylhydrazine, and that can cause later in life cancer, and it can cause ALS. Now, this is Blancomyces montanus, which used to be called Gyrometra montana, and you notice it has a knob-shaped spore, a knob on each end. So even if it's shaped like a little disc, that's a different species, but it will be in Blancomyces. So anything with a spore shaped like the spore shown here is now in the genus Blancomyces. Now, these aren't genera that were made up. This was the name of this mushroom originally 30 years ago. They just returned to the old name. But people are having an absolute conniption fit because they wanted and enjoyed calling everything a gyrometra. And the only thing left in gyrometra are the Gyrometra esculenta complex. And we have two species, and you have the same two up in Alberta, Gyrometra splendida and Gyrometra venenata. Now, here's something in my book. I tell you how to tell them apart. I'm wrong. You can't tell them apart without DNA. They're highly variable in color, highly variable in stipe size. They completely overlap in shape and color with Gyrometra esculenta, which is found in Europe. But they have a lot of gyrometrin in them sometimes. And sometimes they have a little. But Eldon Dirks and I think that maybe we'll be able to tell them apart once we collect a lot of them and get good spore prints. We may be able to distinguish them based on spore size. But the person who originally described Gyrometra splendida did it on a small collection of Gyrometra splendida, and it was atypical material. And then the people that did Gyrometra venenata also did it on a small sample of Morels, and they were, of Gyrometras, and they were atypical. And so the papers indicate that you can tell the two apart, and in reality you can't. So, but they can grow under hardwoods or under cottonwoods. It's really important to know this mushroom and never eat it. It has a rounded to flattened stem. The stem can be somewhat wide, but it's never convoluted and folded like this stem, which is very convoluted and folded in the Blancomyces montanus. Blancomyces montanus or Gyrometra montana, call it whichever name you prefer. It's edible, and it's as good as a morel when properly cooked, but it has a neurotoxin in it, but it does not have gyrometrin, and so it's not dangerous to cook it. It's literally dangerous to cook anything in the Gyrometra esculenta complex. Now, for a long time, we thought that Gyrometra ambigua, now Paragyrometra ambigua, also had gyrometrin in them, and it doesn't. And it has very distinctive spores that are sort of intermediate in size and completely smooth on both ends. And so this whole genus is distinguished by that specific spore shape. And now we'll just take a quick look at some Helvellas. The Helvella spores, pretty much in the whole genus, all look the same. And we split out some things into Dicina as well. And none of these are particular interest as edibles. I wouldn't cook and eat anything, but it's always fun. I have get a great deal of enjoyment just identifying mushrooms and finding new things. So I'm not going to talk a lot about these. They're in the book. They're easily keyed out. What you want to look for is the structure on the underside and this look on the top. the Dyscyotis species is interesting because when it's growing, that white part in this fluted stem is completely underground and you don't see it at all. And so it looks like just a little black urn. Then there are a lot of ascos out there that are a little black urn, but just have a plain round stipe. But these are the folded stipe group. And then included in that, we've got the lacunose, the very folded stipe. You will have Helvella vespertina in your area. I have no idea whether or not you have Helvella dryophylla, which is always associated with oaks, unless it isn't. You don't have it. I kind of didn't expect it there, but I found the ones on the bottom where there weren't any hardwoods around, and Helvella dryophylla is supposed to have oaks. And so I thought I had a new species, and it was just a conifer associate of Helvella dryophylla. And we distinguish it from the one that you have in Alberta, the vespertina. Vespertina has a long stipe, deeply all the way into the center and bound together. Helvella dryophylla, which we find out farther out west, when you cut it in half from top to bottom, it'll sometimes almost unfold like a piece of origami. You can imagine a sheet of tissue and you bunch it up to make the stem, fold the cap over the top, and you have Helvella dryophylla. And then we get into the Helvellas that just have a plain round stipe. I have a lot of fun identifying. You want to look at the underside of the cap. Is it a little bit hairy? Is it very hairy? The features of the stipe will separate into the various species. None of them are of any interest as edibles. The Pizizas, none of them are as interested as edibles. And now Piziza is being split into a whole bunch of subgenera. The main thing you're going to find up in Alberta, and what we find here 90% of the time, is Piziza varia. And that's a very interesting mushroom, because varia means literally the shape of the spores actually change as the cultures get older. The color of the mushroom, the morphology of the mushroom changes. And so this has been given a whole bunch of different species names, but when you do the DNA, they're all identical. And if you grow a single culture, and as you grow it out, you'll get all these different species, and it's all from the same cluster. So this is a very weird mushroom you're going to find in Alberta. But Piziza varia, and that's a name you can pretty reliably throw on almost everything you find up your way. And Caliscypha fulgens is one of the snowbank fungi, and it's a conifer seed parasite. But it turns out we've got at least 4 different species in the group, not just one. And so some of the color range is shown on the right-hand images. Now that one in the very top right, we found some in Central Oregon 2 weeks ago that was really, really bright orange pink, more pink red than orange. So it's quite a variation in color between these, and they look green when they're growing on an orange substrate, but the color of that material in an albino is robin's egg blue. So, but blue on yellow or orange looks green, and that's the Caliscypha fulgens group. And at times they can be in stupendous abundance. I would imagine you've got them up your way, because I find them all over. I know they're in Colorado, I know they're in Idaho, and when I've been up collecting with Martin and in his neck of the woods, or up collecting just across the border in British Columbia, it's always in August and September, so I'm never there in the ASCO season. Now in streams, I'm always interested in things that are growing in streams, and all but the one in the bottom right grow in water. And Vibrissae trencorum will grow on wood, right in flowing water. Mitrula elegans grows coast to coast, I've only found it once in my life, but it's everywhere. It's very frustrating, the fact that it's everywhere. You also have Sclerotinia uh, in your area, but I've only seen it once in my life. So if you've never seen it, don't be surprised. I've only seen Vibrissia trancorum once in my life, and I have yet to see Sauerbiella rainia, which is an interesting snowbank fungus that, as it fruits every year, it fruits in the same place. It'll start out with just 2 or 3 of those bright orange cups with a white base, and the next year it'll have more and more and more. So it gets older and older. It gets bigger and bigger and more spectacular. And then there's the things that grow on dung. Now, the picture on the left is a favorite of mine because that is a single elk pellet photographed with just a regular camera, but then blown up. I had the camera on a tripod so it'd be nice and steady. We found 7 species of fungi on that one elk pellet. It was at a key council meeting at Mount Rainier. We spent the whole evening just studying that one thing. There were ascos, there were basidios, and it was just amazing. But the most beautiful thing on it was Calimania stercoraria. Now, Pseudomonas, well, the one in the top left grows on cow flop, but it's mainly would be found on deer droppings, so you have that. And Bisonectria cartilaginea is really interesting. If you have pica in your area, the pica always defecate all winter long in the same spot. So if you pick up that Bisonectria cartilaginea and turn it over, you'll see little rabbit-like pellets on the underside, but it's very beautiful. And then there's another Calimania showing. So I just really love looking, and some people actually take pieces of animal dung and pellets and bring them home and raise them in a terrarium just to see what they can grow on them. And then here's some interesting, pretty cups of no interest as edibles, but really pretty and fun to collect and talk about. There's some jelly-like mushrooms, and Neocudoniella it is really of interest to me because it grows on spruce rootlets in sphagnum bogs, and the rootlets come right to the surface, and so you find the Neocudonia right on the surface. And I've only photographed it once. I didn't get good pictures because we were walking on a sphagnum bog, and the water beneath us was 35 feet deep. The sphagnum was thick enough to hold us up. We were this was at the Wisconsin foray, and we would sink down about ankle deep in water, and so we were able to walk on water. Now, this was something that just 3 of us got to go out on, 2 mycologists and the local naturalist. This was not an official field trip at the Wisconsin foray, but it was one heck of an experience. So there's these beautiful jelly mushrooms that are fun to identify and work with. And now the tulip cup. There's only one species worldwide, Sarcosphaera coronaria, a year ago. Now we know in North America we have 10, Europe has 2. We don't have either of the European species. They don't have any of our 10. I'm confident that you have Sarcosphaera pacifica, which you undoubtedly call Sarcosphaera coronaria, because that's the name that I used. But I noticed when I look back in the Ascomycetes book, I wrote a description saying that sometimes this thing has a stipe. Well, it turns out the ones that have a stipe are a different species. That's Sarcosphaera montana. And until you collect in your area and look whether it has a stipe or not, we won't know whether you've got montana or not. I know for sure we have it because my collection was one of the things that was sequenced in the paper. So I know what montana is, and pacifica is found all the way to the Great Lakes, at least. It may even be farther east, but it's known from the Great Lakes. So I'm quite confident that you have Pacifica. You might even have another one that's not that far from you. It grows basically in the corner between Idaho, Washington, and British Columbia, and that's called Sarcosphaera columbianum, but very limited distribution. But Sarcosphaera pacifica is widely distributed, and it is a hyperaccumulator of arsenic. And depending on the form of arsenic, it can be mildly toxic to extremely toxic, and it's variable. So don't eat this mushroom. Orson Miller years ago told me that the real bonus is it has a flavor sort of like pink pencil erasers and a texture like that. Now, the whole problem with Gyrometra is that Hydnotria variiformis falls right in the middle of the genus Gyrometra. So you have to change this to Gyrometra, or what the referees insisted on is, no, we have to recognize Hydnotria variiformis, and because we recognize this truffle, which I'm sure you have up in Alberta, but probably never seen. I've only found it once. Again, being a truffle, you don't find them, but this is the troublemaker. Why Gyrometra got split? You have a lot of different Elaphomyces species. We probably have 100 Elaphomyces species in North America, and 2 names to go with all 100. And then Geopora cooperi, I'm also quite confident you'll have up in Canada, but I've only found it once in my life. So whether it's there or not, I mean, I know it's in Canada, whether it's in Alberta, but if you do find it, one time down in Central Oregon, in a burn, we found some that were the size of hardballs, and you just cut off the outer dirty coating and cook it up. It's a very delicious mushroom, but one you very unlikely to see, one I keep looking for but can't find. And things you definitely don't have are the genus tuber, and tuber oregonense and gibbosum are delicious. Tuber loamii and candidum are not delicious. So here's an Oregon Mycological Society foray down in Oregon. The cost of that foray was $1,200 for 8 of us. We got this gourmet meal. We found 1 pound of the Oregon white truffles, photographed in the lower left. I took my 2 ounces. I put 1 ounce wrapped in a clean paper towel in a 1-gallon jar, and a 2nd ounce in a clean paper towel in a 2nd jar. And then I filled the jar up with things like raw eggs, various cheeses. That's to tell me I'm out of time. And whole avocados. And after 2 days, I took all those goodies out and then refilled the jar 2 more days. So anyway, I got 6 gallons of truffled cheese, eggs, butter, avocados, and we ate on my 2 ounces of Oregon white truffles for over a year before we finished them off. So even though that trip was expensive, it was worth it. And that's the end of this talk.